On the afternoon of September 11, 2001, as smoke continued to pour from the World Trade Center in New York, the focus of certain policymakers was already shifting away from the tragedy at hand. Inside the Pentagon, the strategic response to the deadliest attack on American soil was taking shape in real time. According to notes taken contemporaneously that afternoon, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld ordered his staff to find information quickly. He wanted to know if they had enough evidence to strike Saddam Hussein at the same time, directing his team to sweep it all up, things related and not. The very next day, President George W. Bush pulled his top counterterrorism advisor, Richard Clarke, into a room. Bush shut the door and demanded Clarke find out if Iraq was responsible, despite Clarke's insistence that they had already reviewed the data and no connection existed. This lack of a connection was a hard consensus. Both the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon's primary military intelligence organization, knew there was absolutely no operational tie between the Iraqi government and the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks. The actual intelligence directly contradicted the administration's desired policy. To justify a war against Iraq, the planners would need to construct an entirely new pipeline for information. To understand why the administration immediately targeted Iraq, we have to look back to a highly influential think tank called the Project for the New American Century, or PNAC. In January of 1998, key members of this group wrote an open letter to President Bill Clinton, stating that the only acceptable strategy in the Middle East was to remove Saddam Hussein from power. Then, exactly 1 year before the 9/11 attacks, PNAC published a massive manifesto titled Rebuilding America's Defenses. The document served as a step-by-step blueprint for maintaining U.S. preeminence and expanding the military's permanent role in the Persian Gulf. The authors explicitly acknowledged a major hurdle to their plan. They wrote that transforming foreign policy to meet these aggressive goals would be a very slow process, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. When that exact type of catastrophic event occurred a year later, the architects of this blueprint wasted no time. The September 11 attacks provided the long-awaited catalyst to launch an invasion that had been outlined years in advance. Because established intelligence agencies refused to validate this pre-planned war, the Pentagon set up its own alternative channel. Operating under Undersecretary of Defense Douglas Feith, they created the Office of Special Plans. Run by William Lutey and Abram Scholsky, this office functioned largely as a shadow government, operating outside the bounds of traditional oversight. Former Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Karen K. Watsky, who worked in the Pentagon at the time, later testified that the Office of Special Plans was specifically designed to disparage official CIA reports. She witnessed officials replacing measured assessments with outright falsehoods, which were then funneled directly to the White House. To supply these alternative assessments, the office relied heavily on Ahmad Chalabi. Chalabi was the leader of the Iraqi National Congress, an umbrella group of anti-Hussein exiles based in London. He had no military background and was a convicted bank fraudster who had previously failed a polygraph test. Despite repeated warnings from the State Department that his defectors were untrustworthy, Chalabi's network became the primary source for spectacular stories. They fed the Pentagon claims about secret underground prisons holding Kuwaitis and mobile biological warfare facilities disguised as yogurt trucks. The Defense Intelligence Agency later confirmed that the source for the mobile labs was an out-and-out fabricator. But the credibility of the sources did not matter to the architects of the war. They deliberately chose to rely on known fraudsters because those sources provided the specific, terrifying details needed to sell an invasion. The manipulation of intelligence faced fierce resistance from experienced military leaders. Retired four-star General Anthony Zinni openly stated he had never seen intelligence confirming Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. Zinni directly compared the deceptive buildup to the Gulf of Tonkin incident that escalated the Vietnam War. In early 2003, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military officers in the armed forces, expressed grave concerns that invading without Allied backing would violate the United States no-first-strike policy. Secretary Rumsfeld was reportedly infuriated, demanding they get in line or quit. To eliminate this internal resistance, a systematic purge took place within the Pentagon. By August 2003, Rumsfeld and his allies had compiled a list of 3-star and 4-star generals who urged caution, effectively forcing them into retirement. Even Secretary of State Colin Powell was eventually broken down. On February 5, 2003, Powell capitulated, appearing before the United Nations Security Council to present unauthenticated intercepts, satellite photos of empty trucks, and uncorroborated defector statements as hard facts. With the dissenting generals pushed out of the way, and the most trusted voice in the administration formally presenting the cooked intelligence on the world stage, the internal war had been won. The path to an actual invasion was now clear. The final hurdle was selling the war directly to the American public. A 2003 report by the Luntz research companies laid out the linguistic playbook for this campaign, bluntly advising that the words Saddam Hussein were the absolute strongest weapon to deliver support for the war. Following this script, administration officials continuously invoked Saddam Hussein's name. They used rhetorical questions and speeches to seamlessly conflate the Iraqi dictator with the tragedy of 9/11 and threats to children's safety, despite knowing these claims were entirely baseless. Vice President Dick Cheney went on national television repeatedly, claiming that a 9/11 hijacker had met with an Iraqi intelligence officer in Prague. It was a complete fiction that the Czech government and the CIA had already thoroughly debunked. The facts were irrelevant to the communication strategy. This was a coordinated propaganda effort designed to bypass empirical evidence and weaponize the public's lingering trauma from the September 11th attacks. This chart shows the chilling success of that campaign. By August 2003, polls showed that 69% of Americans actually believed Saddam Hussein had at least something to do with the September 11th attacks. A specific group of policymakers had successfully dragged the world into a premeditated war. They achieved this by creating their own shadow intelligence office, relying on known fraudsters, purging the military's finest strategists, and launching a highly deceptive campaign of linguistic manipulation. The origins of the Iraq War stand as a historical warning. It shows exactly how easily empirical facts can be subverted by a dedicated group of ideologues, maneuvering a traumatized public into supporting a conflict that had absolutely nothing to do with their actual safety. We hope this breakdown helped clarify the complex and shadowy history behind the origins of the Iraq War. If you found this deep dive valuable and want to keep uncovering the truth behind the narratives we are sold, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, The Bookish Breakdown. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next episode.